So Azita Ardakani is the head of Love Social. Whether it is raising awareness on the global water crisis and helping her client become the #1 cause on Facebook, or a 48-hour emergency campaign to raise funds for a natural disaster in Pakistan, Azita is using digital activation to help companies and organizations raise the profile of some of the biggest social problems we face. She is the youngest female founder of a B Corporation, and advisors to Love Social include, get ready for this, Twitter founder Jack Dorsey and Todd Moskowitz, former CEO of Warner Brothers Music. Please help me welcome Azita Ardakani.
All right. So I guess we should cue up my slides. There we go. So starting Love Social was actually an accident. A perfect accident, but an accident. It was definitely not a pre-calculated thing. I didn't grow up thinking I was going to start a digital media agency because I'm pretty sure when I was born there was no such thing. And I was actually born in Iran, and when I was 3 years old, we immigrated over to Canada, where I've been growing up till about 3 months ago, where I moved to New York. And growing up in Iran, even though I was only there till about the ages 3 and 4, I must have picked up on something, and it was probably the barrier of communication. I just remember being a little girl with my mom out and just kind of being hushed a little bit, not being able to say what I wanted to say all the time. And that changed when I moved to Canada, and freedom of communication was just kind of a given. So this all kind of tips into the same theme that as a millennial, which I am, I'm 27, I don't know I'm a millennial. I don't self-identify as a millennial. I self-identify as me. And you may have seen the cover of a Time magazine a few months ago that said the me generation, and it's true and false. I didn't grow up thinking I was going to be an entrepreneur or that I was going to do anything specific in particular. I was just driven by the passion and the excitement of the things that I wanted to do. I didn't think that I was going to be a specific role or an occupation. I wasn't driven by money or anything like that. It was more of what were the things that drew me in and what was going to keep me there. One of the themes in my life that has never gone away was really thinking about why and how people gather. I was always hyper curious as to communities of people and what made them come together. So I did my degree in sociology, which was a natural extension, and during that time, serendipity came into timing and opportunity. So the serendipity part was that social media started being born around the time I was finishing my degree in sociology. And so this amazing offline scholastic sector that I was totally enamored with was tipping into the online space. And I was just so excited by this premise that the reason people come together offline was happening in this digital arena, and there was no geographical barrier. Someone in Indianapolis and someone in India could come together on a cause or an issue or a communication or something that they believed in and they wanted to have a dialogue with. So the lack of barriers and the lack of basically anything to make communities come together started tipping into and informing an idea that I had. And it was to the pleasure of my parents. I would be sitting nerding out in my bedroom and very early to all the social platforms, teaching myself HTML, and trying to figure out, how I could participate in this and not just watch it happen, but be a part of the process to create movements and create communities. At this time, I was also really interested in how brands were communicating, and I was watching them enter this social space and almost have this very strange reaction to it. All of a sudden, they couldn't communicate the way that they were used to. So people were gathering and creating these social networks exponentially. They were all increasing. And then as organizations and corporations started to enter them, they were kind of hitting a wall. They couldn't communicate the way that they were used to. And people weren't responding the way that they would have liked to. And then Love Social was born. So Love Social was my Twitter handle at the time. And it kind of became a vehicle for me to start outwardly communicating about things I was passionate about. And it tipped into this.
Sometimes I feel like my hands have been life is just too much. You got the love I need to see me through. When food is gone, you are my daily meal.
When friends are gone, I know my Savior's love is real. Your love is real.
You got the love. 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 You.
So I remember very distinctly this moment where, you know, my world like slowed down, and I just remember where I came from, and I remembered finishing my degree, and I remember social media being born, and I remember all these pieces coming together, and just having this very clear, to Oprah's words, aha moment, where I saw an opportunity, and it was just so obvious, and it was really audacious because it wasn't like, you know, there was no precedent for this, and I had nobody around me that was like, this is how you start a company. But I just believed so strongly that I could help infuse and inspire the organizations and the corporations I believed in to optimize these amazing tools of today to change the way that they were communicating. And so one of the organizations that I reached out to was the United Nations, and I started working with them on an initiative, and I was actually volunteering on it for 6 months before I moved into an actual real role. And what we noticed was, regardless of the pieces being in place with an amazing initiative, and in this case it was the global clean water crisis, you can't force a movement. Just like as a corporation, you can't force people to be your consumer. There is this element on digital and social that is just so innately human. And people will get a very real sense from a Twitter message or an Instagram, from a Facebook post to a video, of if you are what you say you are. And for me, I saw this opportunity to help work with amazing organizations and people to help humanize their voice in the digital realm and create constituencies of people that were actually going to stick around. So not pop-up communities that were going to react to something and then dissipate, but how do you help them communicate with intention? How do you help them think about every tweet that you put out is energy that you're basically taking from someone. You're asking for someone's attention. Why do you think you deserve it? At this time, since the time we came to market, the cause space has actually grown in a huge way. This is a good and bad thing. So when we came to market, there was about 76 causes on Facebook. Now there's over 376,000 causes on Facebook. It's a lot of causes. And it's not necessarily a good thing. What we're seeing is an oversaturation and fragmentation of the same goals. A lot of these people are trying to accomplish the same things, but they're fragmenting through digital to do them in their own ways. I'm going to talk about 3 campaigns and initiatives that we've been a part of, and kind of the common denominator that has helped fuel these movements. So the first one, Summit on the Summit, that I referenced, it was where HP and P&G came together with the UNHCR to do a global campaign around the global clean water crisis. And there was a series of celebrities like Lupe Fiasco and Santi Gold, and that's actually how I met my business partner, Todd. And it was this incredible thing, and you would think all the pieces are together. Everyone around the world must have rallied and just became a part of the global clean water. It turns out they didn't. They were just like, that's interesting. What does that really mean? How do I really participate? And we had to boil it down to the most simple communication kind of tagline, which was water equals life. Because from that very basic umbrella, anybody from anywhere could just get a sense of what does that mean, and then from there tiered into how they could take action from where they were with whatever they had. The other campaign, Gasland, so Josh Fox, the director of Gasland, came to me before his film even went to Sundance. You may or may not be familiar with it. And it hadn't even picked up any steam. I saw the documentary, I was super moved. And for us, the challenge was, how do you engage the nation around, at the time, hydraulic fracturing. Fracturing wasn't a well-known term. And the people that were highly affected were in disenfranchised areas across America. They weren't in hot button areas that they could just, show up in Times Square and take action. they were in the middle of Ohio and they didn't necessarily know who their representative was around the issue. So we made it dummy proof, which is another huge part of what moves a movement. We made it so simple and so accessible that anybody with wherever they were, with whatever they had, could take action from a very basic point of entry. And Gasland, we were successful in basically creating such a groundswell activity that became a self-sustained movement, which is really, as an NGO or as any cause and campaign, what you want to tip it towards. If you're constantly having to rally your people, you're not doing a very good job. You really want to get it to a place where they rally on their own, they just need a little tip in the right direction. Because really, the movements to succeed need to be moving on their own. They need to be something that people would come together anyways. You have just created a framework and made it so easy for them to show up. The third thing that I'm really excited about this year is NPR. Love Social has joined NPR to help launch Generation Listen, which is their new movement to engage millennials around the incredible power of audio programming and their highly integrity-driven content. And with NPR, it's an amazing situation and opportunity because it's this legacy organization that's been around for so long. And for them, it's less about changing anything and more about how do you jig it a little bit to the framework and the context of the audience that you're trying to go after. So the three key themes that I think that have inspired everything that we do at Love Social is authenticity, really looking at, and authenticity is like a buzzword I feel like everybody uses right now. So to be truly authentic, you will know. If you're sitting in a meeting with your team and you're a 6-person NGO or a 400-person NGO and people aren't getting excited about it, it's not authentic enough. If you have to explain it several times and you're using big paragraphs, it's not simple enough. And if you don't wake up and bolt out of bed in the morning to try to take action, it's not urgent enough. So these are the three key themes that whenever we're working on anything that requires an actual movement and people showing up and taking action, we put into place. I think it's interesting because at the end of the day, I am a millennial, even though I still don't know exactly what that means. But the themes that have inspired my life are just really listening to my gut, going with my instinct, and whether it's me dealing with a client that is offering us an amazing lump sum of cash to do something and it doesn't feel right, we don't do it. My drivers aren't the same as maybe my parents or the generation before us. My drivers are truly to think, in my lifetime, what can I do that I can walk away from and feel really good about? And we have this incredible opportunity using digital media to humanize ourselves to the masses. That's all I got, guys. Thank you.
So wonderful. And everybody wonders who millennials are, right? So the skinny on that is nobody will decide for about 20 years. so when sociologists tell us they'll probably land in the late 70s, so Jose and I just make it in, and you're well in the group.
Good to be a part of it.
So we actually have a question from a Twitter user, Tara Finglas, asked, in your work with the UN, how do you balance making organizations human with helping people tell their own human stories in developing countries?
It's really interesting because when you are an organization, there's a story that you want to tell, and then there's a story that you're trying to tell about your constituency or whoever you're trying to activate. And I think the first job is to make sure that your story is the platform that everything else is baked off of. So if you've done a good job, then really it becomes the self-sustaining movement where people know a trusted source like the United Nations and what that looks like and feels like and sounds like, and then any campaign that they activate is just a natural extension of that.
Makes sense. I want to touch on this authenticity idea because I think what you said about that being a buzzword is exactly right.
Yeah.
People, if you have to wonder if you're being authentic, then probably you're not being authentic. But I wonder when you apply it to leadership and to the sort of intersection that we've talked about with corporate America and those organizations that want to become more involved in this, but maybe don't have it as a natural part of their DNA. How do they do this authentically?
How do they
get involved in the social causes and the things that they're not just their millennial employees, but their consumers and everybody else cares about?
Something that corporations do a really bad job of is they keep looking outwards to activate around the cause space as opposed to looking inwards. And I think that's why we've seen the proliferation of causes, which is oversaturated. I think for company to really find a cause that makes sense to them, they need to not necessarily look for an NGO out there, but maybe it's their employees. Maybe their employees in their local community are super excited and passionate about something. And engaging their own audience as opposed to bringing in some consultants to say, like, what is the right cause for us is definitely recommended. Because when you choose a cause that your internal team can rally around, then again, you baked in that constituency. It's really looking at what pieces can you put into place that are going to be sustainable, as opposed to having to teach all your employees as to, hey guys, there's this NGO that we partnered with in Africa, and they're like, but we're here and we don't understand why we're supporting. And it can be a very good cause, but there's probably one close to home that will have a lot more real impact for the organization.
And I want to underscore that, because I think that African village problem is a serious issue. Like, I can't tell you the number of corporations that we would get releases from that'll say, we're building houses in this village, and I'm thinking, you're an art dealership in Manhattan. What are you talking about? So,
and it's fine too. I mean, I think that if the founder story, the genesis story is something that somebody went there and had this incredible experience and it was very visceral and they want an extension of that, that kind of makes sense. But overall, I think that looking at, and maybe this is a good time to talk about the B Corporation part. Absolutely. Because for us, I want to make money. And I'm okay with that. And I think people need to make money. I think one of the problems with NGOs is that money is this like bad thing, that if you are an NGO, then you have to be totally selfless with what you're doing. And I love B corporations because it's a certification process that basically reinforces good behavior. And to become B Corp certified, you kind of have to meet a bunch of mandates. And so if you physically manufacture or distribute anything, there has to be a really high level as to what that looks like. So Patagonia, Warby Parker, Etsy are all B Corp certified companies. And you actually get tax breaks in many states. And I think that it's a new model to looking at the problem, not just of this not-for-profit organization and what they're doing, but social enterprise as a place that can actually compete with our marketplace, which is GDP driven. So it kind of NGOs are kind of set up to fail in some ways sometimes, because they're set up in a system that just reinforces kind of not making money when we're operating in a system that celebrates finance. So I think that us becoming a B Corp was this very intentional decision. And when we work with corporations, sometimes it's not give a bunch of your money for this cause, but can you change one chip and one SKU of one of your products? And can we talk about that as a story? Or is there something else that you can do from the inside that doesn't necessarily line up with a not-for-profit, but is also a really good behavior?
Yeah, and feels authentic across
Totally.
the board. So we've got a question in from text. How do you help people or organizations communicate with intention and build the movement rather than constantly seeming like they're begging for support?
I think that looking back to every piece of communication that you're putting out in the world and reverse engineering where it's all going back to is really important. Mm-hmm. And again, that question of if you're sitting in a boardroom with the people around you and you're having a conversation and they're not excited, please don't expect your audience to be, because they're not going to be excited too. So when you're crafting your editorial calendar for social media, or you're looking at what your digital campaign strategy is going to look like, it's looking at every piece of communication along the way and what your rallying cry looks like. We go through the process of creating a manifesto with every client. Mm-hmm. And a manifesto is a really great way to humanize the experience, because you can't talk about your product, your service, or even your goals. So even as a cause campaign, you can't talk about like the end goal. It's about the human elements and the inherent value proposition that you're putting out in the world. And that becomes a really great place to kind of go back to and rally around.
Talk a little bit, if you can, about the genesis of that process, because sometimes I think it's really great for people to hear how you creatively engineer process, not just product.
How you creatively engineer a manifesto?
Yeah, like what made you decide on that specific thing? Because it is very innovative and thoughtful and brings something out of your client that you wouldn't necessarily get any other way.
Totally. For us, the only way, we actually had to productize it, because I found I was having conversations with clients and they were like, why are you asking me these super personal questions? I just want you to come up with a communication strategy for us. And I was like, okay, we need to figure out another way to do this. And the manifesto is kind of our Trojan horse. It helps us get in with an organization and ask questions that make them uncomfortable, but we're like, we need this to be successful, and it's under the guise of a manifesto, but it works. And it helps them look at themselves in a way they wouldn't otherwise. It helps them look at areas that they probably don't think about celebrating. And it helps us have these very human conversations without which we can't be successful in the things that we create. Whether you're a vendor or you're an internal department at a company, if you're not able to have basically very human communication about what people's drivers are, then it's very hard to be successful in any way. So for us, it was productizing our internal process, which is discover the inherent value proposition, figure out the rallying cry, and then think about what it looks like to pass the baton to the audience.
So structure.
Structure.
So 15 seconds. Tell us what you, what's the challenge you see ahead, and how do you think you'll meet it?
I think it's the oversaturation problem, and I think it goes back to working together. I think we need to get a lot better at collaboration. We need to look at how we can cohesively come together to make things happen, and less about us as our internal and independent vehicles, and working way less in vacuums and far more together.
Wonderful. How great is Azita?